after HL, Christy, Peter. The fact that empathy takes time is a real challenge to many people who feel like they have too much to do and not enough time to do it. I definitely want to address this question. Let's hear from some people in the that are joining back from the rooms. Who would like to share? And we won't get to everybody, but I can imagine there were some common themes that people noticed in their conversations. So probably the easiest way to share, since the chat's getting pretty long, just hit the hand raise button.
Yeah. All right, Len. I think Len wants to share something. Go ahead, Len. So remove that.
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you. All right.
I think you know that at its core, human-centered human-centered leadership has to define on you, right, the person, on so that if you know who you are inside, then you can go forth and understand everyone else. And you have to provide vulnerability in that sense. If you are the leader, tell them your story first. And the only way you're going to tell your story is if you know who you are. And so when you know who you are, you tell your story. You have to teach others how to tell their story by telling your story and saying, hey, you remember how I told you the story about when I did this and this? Well, this is kind of the same and similar thing. And a lot of youngins, millennials today, because they're the median age group, they're going to look for power. They're going to look for some power. And if you don't have any power, they're not going to respect you. So how do you do that? We have to show them some power, either through storytelling or, for me, self-defense. I teach my people self-defense all day long. And they see that in me and they respect me for it.
I appreciate that perspective. That made me think of a couple of things. One is that we have to understand that different generations have different communication styles and different values. And it's really important for us to understand that so we can address those. And then also leading by example is another thing that you brought up. So that's excellent. Thank you for sharing.
And I love too that, Len, that the, that leaders have to tell their stories. I actually like that because, not all leaders share their stories, and it's the stories about their real, like, open and honest stories. So I love that. What other stories, what other comments do we have from people in the rooms?
Let's go to Christy next. She has her hand raised.
Christine.
Hi, Luis. Hi, David. Hi, Lori Creever.
A lot of friends here in the room.
We had a very human-centered conversation in our group. But one of the things that was brought up was for people who really like to see numbers and data, how does David measure his success as a human-centered leader within his company? How does he know the success that he has?
I love that, David. Right for you.
Well, we do in fact, we just finished a company-wide engagement survey. And we asked all 6,000 plus team members about 85 questions. And for us, a lot of that gets back to how are they feeling? How empowered are they? What confidence do they have in the values in the culture? I think ultimately that's our scorecard on whether or not we're creating the right environment. It isn't a scorecard around servant leadership or human-centered leadership specifically, but if we're doing those things well, I think they translate into really high engagement scores.
Yeah.
I love it. And the human-centered leaders use data too and metrics, right, to make sure that we're going in the right direction. I love that. What other comments from the breakout rooms? Who else?
Say, Luis, I'll offer one while other people are thinking, because one of the questions that Jose had asked was around how do you get your team on board these cultural elements, and he was describing how important it was to get senior leaders to be bought into this culture and be perpetuating it themselves. And I agree that that's really important, but ultimately, actually, that's in a big organization, that's relatively easy to do, because that's your colleague base. You're with them on a regular basis, engaging, and you're in these open dialogues together. I think the hardest thing to do in a larger organization is to thaw the permafrost of middle management. And middle management forms this barrier between good ideas rising up and cultural implementation that leadership wants to engage. And if you've ever worked with permafrost, it's not like just a little bit of spring frost in Minnesota when you're trying to build a foundation. It's deep, and it takes a long time to thaw.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you again, for your honesty, and thanks, Jose Luis Brett, good friend of mine. Thank you for that great question, and thank you for being with us here tonight. Thanks, David. Okay, who else? What other questions do we have?
It looks like Darcy has a hand raised.
Darcy, let's do it.
Hello, hi, so happy to be here all. I just wanted to say, first of all, just really appreciate this opportunity to join this call. I actually know a colleague who works at your company, David, and she just absolutely raves about the culture. So it's so, inspiring to see you join a conversation like this. I think it really brings forward the ideas that a lot of companies are doing. My company is making efforts here as well. And I just wanted to just share that I think it's a great space for us to all talk about this and to know that other companies are making it a priority too. So I really just wanted to say thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darcy. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I've learned so much. I've known Darcy for what, I don't know, like over a decade, and I just learned something from her all the time. Thank you, Darcy. Okay, what else? Who else do we have? Okay, Julie, do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in our group, there was one person who raved about the culture in her organization. And I was so taken with it. And I said, can you share your organization? And it was Mortenson.
Oh, wow.
I won't give it away, but I'm just saying you're walking your talk. And so that's really good to hear from somebody who's inside your organization.
Awesome. Very good. That's great to hear, David. And this was not a setup or anything. David did not pay us anything. There's no money, exchanged to hear or anything like that. Okay. I want to hear more comments. Who else has something to say from tonight?
Luis, hello. How are you doing?
Hi, Julieta. How are you? So good to see you.
Good. Thanks for inviting me to the meeting. I know that I joined late due to another meeting. And then I came in right before we went into the breakout rooms. But we had a really interesting conversation just during that time, talking about leaders being vulnerable and how important that is in whatever environment we're in. And we also talked about, I was in the breakout with Lang and talked about how important it is also to get to know yourself first, so that when that vulnerability comes out, and you don't know what's going to come back once you're being vulnerable with the team, with the people that your peers, that is very, very important from an emotional intelligence as well as a human-centered leadership point of view, to understand who you are, understand where you come from, what kind of mindset you're going into, and that you already have established, so that you can actually practice your emotional intelligence whenever that comes back to you. And so I think that vulnerability is something that until a couple of years ago, I thought there is no way that I'm going to open myself up as a leader because people don't need to know that part of me or whatever, but it turns out to be a very powerful thing.
I love it. And there's the trust, I think multiple components that David brought up at the beginning of the call, right? That we're going to be vulnerable by trusting others before, it's like some people say, well, I don't, people have to gain my trust. So they start with zero trust and people have to work hard to be able to gain their trust. Whereas other people say, no, I start trusting you. And obviously if you lose my trust, then that's different. But, we start there with trust and knowing ourselves. I love that. Nasmin, so okay, go ahead, David, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment about the vulnerability and sharing stories. And we started an advanced leadership program within our organization more than 15 years ago. taught by senior leaders, and we tell our career stories. And my career story is a roller coaster, highs and lows.
Now.
and you know, it's emotional when you talk about a low in your career, and people are always taken aback that a leader is talking about their own failure. Yeah. But that is super important in terms of being an authentic leader, and being an empathetic leader.
Thank you, David. And it's inspiring as well, because if we think that leaders are only on a trajectory up, you know, straight up, then we say, well, I already, you know, I have my lows, so I don't have a chance here. But knowing that leaders that did really well also had their lows can be very inspiring. I wanted to quickly, I know multiple people are asking for the word, but I wanted, Nasneen is in India. I think it's like what, like 6 a.m. in the morning or something for her there. So you probably stay awake all night. Thank you, Nasneen. I love to have your comments.
Yes. Actually, my question is for David. He said he's part of large organization. So I understand what he explained right now about the middle management where ideas come up and they submerge down. How to handle office politics in whether it's a large or a small organization when groups are already formed, that's group dynamics is already there, and office politics works under, you know, groupism. So how do a leader comes as a real leader at that point of time? How can he break? Is it possible to break that group or make people at par? Yes, David, that's for you.
That's a difficult question.
I know.
Because I think it's a natural human tendency to want to form smaller cliques.
Yes.
And sometimes it's what gives people power. Sometimes it's what makes them feel good. And we, as an organization, try and set a culture that does not tolerate that. And we try and set a culture that is intermingling teams a lot across the organization. So it's not ever a stagnant, you know, just this group of 20 people, different leaders and different contributors are moving into different positions and working with different teams all the time.
Okay, well said. I liked it. So you mean to say changing the positions of people over the time will balance the whole setup?
That's
right?
one. And two, you got to have a culture that doesn't promote or enable those cliques to exist or flourish anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Well said. Really liked it. I really appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you being awake, Nasneen. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Other comments? We have 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we hear from everybody. Okay, Len, go ahead.
I think if you establish a curriculum and teach them how to tell their stories, like Toastmasters. You guys ever been Toastmasters here? Anybody? It's one of my favorite things to do. I love that. I love that group. I love doing Toastmasters. It's one of my favorite things. I teach it now, I find it so fun. It's just so valuable, and as well as allowing these individuals to make mistakes, fail. You know, I mean, everyone makes mistakes, and you can't punish them for that. I mean, you got to laugh it off and say, hey, man, don't worry about it. It happens, you know. It's not like it's going to hurt you in the long run. So I think that's very important, especially with millennials, guys. Millennials are very sensitive, very empathetic, and they're empaths. Empaths at heart. So you got to show them power, and you got to show them empathy, and you got to be sensitive with them. But they're fun to be with. And that's where I go.
Thank you so much. And, you know, so when you're budgeting for the company, budget for mistakes so that, you know, for the cost of mistakes so that everyone can learn. All right. We have more comments, more questions for David or comments for David. Gary, I think you wanted to say something earlier. I may have cut you off.
Hey, Luis, great to see you. So we had a great group. We had Lorna, Libby, and Kelly in our group. And we had a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And in fact, we were doing this because of you, Luis. You invited, or they knew you from various places, and I said that, yes, I remember Luis when he was an MBA student. We recruited him from Latin America, and he made quite an impact at the Carlson School. And so that's why I'm joining your group, and it's great to see the impact that you're making on this community. We had, being out in California now, I was, with the Carlson School some years ago, being out in California as the dean of the Kroll School of Business here at Biola. It's so interesting, the conversations that for the most part Minnesotans are having, and one of our participants referenced the George Floyd murder, and it struck me that of course I've been following that because of my time in Minnesota, but also it's that event has affected everyone around the country, and around the world. But as Minnesotans, David, I was wondering, how has that event created a real question about who we are, or we see ourselves as Minnesota leaders? I've always, when I was at the Carlson School, I really saw, Luis, as we brought students to the U, and that we provided a form of management education that was more human-centered, that was more servant-oriented, and that really cared about business ethics and about the human person and about human flourishing. And I think that's a part of the Minnesota ethos. But how has that event questioned that? And then how are you in your organization making sure that that the human that we're thinking about is more inclusive and includes everyone, including populations and communities in Minneapolis even, that that just really there's a lot of inequities, and so African American communities and other communities that can need to be able to share in the good that comes from good business and the productivity that can come from a great business.
There's a lot in that question, Gary, and actually there are a number of my personal coaches on this call today, and Christy Lazenberg I consider one of my DEI coaches, and I think what George Floyd has done has created a revolution of how we think about our awareness of the experience of people. Every single leader I know what would have said they were on a DEI journey before George Floyd. They had hired a director, they were making progress in diversity, but they none of us realized how far we had to go and how little we had done. And at the heart of your question, I think, is this concept of Minnesota nice, where just keep your head down and don't say or do anything that's going to offend anyone. So what we do is we don't actually include and engage anyone. We don't enter a courageous conversation that shares background and experience. And all of that creates barrier. And I want to say we used to be on now we're on a quest. And we are on a quest to stamp out the racial injustice, racial inequities, and create an environment for everybody to bring their whole selves and succeed. And that's in our business, in our industry, and in our community.
Well, let me just say, from the West Coast perspective, we'd love to see Minnesota lead in that area. Because Minnesota-based companies, I think, have led in a lot of different areas in terms of quality, in terms of human flourishing and creating businesses that really serve society, and and the whole country, the whole world needs organizations and companies that can lead us out of the challenges that we are in and that we face. And so wherever that leadership comes, that's fantastic, and it would be great to see it come out of Minnesota as a community, a business community that has been galvanized by this event and has the history and resources to address it, the sophistication and the approach and the heart to do that.
I want to share that David has a lot of heart, because when David and Luis and I met for a meeting to prepare for tonight a week or so ago, David had to get going because he was going to Lake Street that day, and he was leading up some volunteer teams that were helping to rebuild businesses. So I think it's not just about what you say is important, but what you actually do. And I think David is too humble to put that out there, but I think we should really acknowledge when people are doing good work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tamara. And thank you, Gary, for sharing that. Very appreciated. All right. So we are now at the last 8 minutes. And I apologize. I know we started late. So I want to make sure that everyone who wants to say something tonight, who wants to ask any questions to David or Tamara, they can do it. So let's maximize these few minutes that we have left. Who else wants to say something tonight? Jose Brett.
Luis, so great to see you, buddy. It's been a long time.
Yes.
So I jump on this, and I am enjoying it. Thank you. I want to say something. And I was in the breakout session with David, and unfortunately, due to the way that I connected, they could see me, but I couldn't listen. They couldn't listen to me. But one thing that David said that resonates is you gotta feel it, and and that tells a lot about yourself as a leader, that you feel it. And one thing is that once we see through as leaders, and especially in the diversity, once we see diversity as a propeller for better, rather than a compliance checkbox, we are going to be, way, way much better than we are right now. So once we have that in mind, then we swallow and we leave it. We leave by it. Then I think that we're going to start seeing not only progress but transformation.
I love that. Diversity is a propeller. I'm going to use that, Jose.
Oh, no compliance, not just that compliance. Leveraging the power of diversity. I love that. Okay, more. Go ahead, guys. Let us hear you. We have.
It's interesting to see. I'm trying to catch up on the chat a little bit. The conversation that people have been having as to, Lang brought up that empathy can be seen perhaps as a taboo, because part of the about vulnerability piece, that Libby chimed in that said, no, we're seeing more and more EQ is really being touted as something that we want to see. And then Julie said, a good balance between empathetic, compassion, wisdom. It's just great to see everybody connecting and sharing here.
Yeah, love the chat. I couldn't keep up with the chat. I was trying to read every comment, but I just had to give up. All right, so the last few minutes. Come on, guys. We want to hear you all. Who else has something to say?
Bobby also shared, he said, in my experience, diversity is the key to creating synergistic effects. And we're finally acknowledging that as well, that when we have diverse teams, not just racially, but all kinds of backgrounds and abilities really help to strengthen our teams and organizations. So absolutely, that synergy.
I love it. John Alto, go ahead.
Yeah, David, I'm just curious. There was a discussion earlier about leaders need to talk, right? They need to speak, and I fully agree with that. But I think we've all been surrounded by leaders that's all they do is talk, and they don't ever listen. So how do you put that in your organization? Or is there any formalized things you do, one-on-ones or group meetings where you're doing the listening and your purpose is not to talk?
I love it.
Yeah, John, if you heard me say leaders need to talk, I think I misstated that, because I would have said first, leaders need to communicate, but leaders also have to listen. And certainly post George Floyd, I probably participated in 8 different listening sessions, both internal to the organization, in the industry, and in the community. And that was an awakening for me, both of the experience of just listening, literally for a couple hours in some instances. And we don't do that often enough. And so I can't say we have a formalized process or we've created a way to do that, but I like that thought a lot. I think we do it one-on-one in how we engage in our presence throughout the organization, because we take time with people, but we don't do it in larger settings, which actually might have some other benefits.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, John. Great question. Thank you, David, for.
I want to add, if I may, so I'm a talker, you know me, Luis, but so yes, listening is key, but I think that we're not looking at what we really need to do here, and I think David is doing it, is the action of engagement, the purpose, the right purpose of engagement. That's the first thing. Then listening comes after that. So listening, it is the consequence of the engagement, and we really need to look to that in a very, very active way.
Yes,
so beyond listening.
And actually, Jose, I want to build on that. What you just said that I think is really important is that one kind of leadership that I've seen, it's not uncommon that there is a large, company event, and then the CEO will, this is not David, but the CEO will come in, and then at the beginning of a meeting says something, important and provoking, and, something that may be inspiring, and everybody's now like all, shaking, and they want to engage and stuff. And then the moderator says, well, would like to thank Mr. Jeff, Jack, or whoever, John, and the person leaves. So this is a leadership where the person comes in, speaks for 10 or 15 minutes, and then leaves the message and leaves the room, basically. So it's kind of a one-way communication. I've also seen it on LinkedIn too, where someone, or on social media, where you have a leader that posts something that is really interesting and very powerful and puts it out there, and then people start reacting to it and they start commenting, but there is no reaction from the author. So it's like, you left that there, and then you leave, and then like you don't care about what your comments, about the result, about the consequences of your comment, right? And I don't mean bad consequences, but positive comments, positive consequence and engagement and stuff. And so I think that in this case is the leadership where we are going to come in to address an audience, say something, and stay to then, like you were saying, Jose, I love that, to engage and then to listen and to actually respond to what people have to say about what you said, because that's how we're going to have that dialogue. And I know we are just at 7. Actually, I'm going to ask for those of you that can stay just for 5 more minutes. I love to ask anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to, if you have any, thoughts, comments, questions that you'd like to share, even though it's 7, I love to extend it for a little bit so that folks can share their thoughts. Anyone who has not spoken yet, Terry, go ahead. Mute. No, you're okay? Okay, something else. Okay, Christy, you want to say something?
Just thank you very much for this. I do have to go, but I really appreciate this very much. This was more than I even thought it was going to be. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Christy.
David.
And thanks for all
Christy, nice to meet you.
And thank you for
Nice to meet
coaching
you too.
David.
Louis, this is B.
Yes.
Brown. I don't know if you can hear me, but Louis, I just want to thank David, you, Louis, and Tamara for this opportunity to talk about emotional intelligence in the corporate world. It's well needed, about time. And thank you very much, David, for telling us your approach. And we can tell the connection you have with people. It was very obvious to me and many others. So thank you, David, for coming in to speak with us today. Again, my name is B. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
B. Thank you so much. Love to see you. Thanks for making the time. Peter, you had some comments earlier. You want to share some thoughts in our last minutes?
Oh, well, I had a question earlier about the achievement gap. That Minneapolis-St. Paul is particularly poorly placed in the list of where we fall in terms of the achievement gap. And I'm wondering if there's something to be said about how what leadership can do about that. I know that David has been very participatory in that issue in the past.
Well, I think it's a great symbol of some of the racial inequities that live in our community, and it's been a problem for decades. Mm-hmm. I actually think Alan Page's approach to change the Constitution of the state of Minnesota might be the only way to create enough radical change that we actually change the outcome. The state of Minnesota Constitution says we will just provide an education platform. It doesn't even say good education. And Alan Page wants to raise that bar and say every single student is required to receive a good education, and then let the legislators and the educators define what that is and raise our bar and standards for everybody, no matter what zip code they live in.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Peter, for the question. And thank you, David. And I think that's a really important thing because, I have one of the comments, I know you only have just a few more minutes, but I wanted to share these that say, for example, in COVID, right, with COVID, some people say, oh, COVID, I'm fine. I haven't gotten COVID or maybe I got it and I, recover, so it's fine. And I'm young, it's no problem. And then in that assessment, it's like a very individual and very personal assessment where you're really not paying attention to the rest of the things. That in the same way I feel when somebody speaks, about, we're very proud of education in Minnesota. We're one of the best educations. And I think that we need to modify the language so that we can reflect some of those realities. So for example, we can say, hey, we are very proud of education in Minnesota. We have, there are still some inequities in how, we have an achievement gap and we have to work on this and that, where you can recognize the good thing, but also be aware of it. Because otherwise, say, for example, one of the population that has been affected by the achievement gap is the Hispanic population. So me as a part of a member of a Latino community, when I hear someone else says, oh, the Minnesota education is great, it's perfect, and this and that, I'm like, well, but like, what about for me, not for my people, right? And so we need to integrate that in our language, right? It's the same with business. How is it going in your business with COVID? And someone says, wow, that we make masks, so it's going great. Oh my gosh, it's been like this year is fantastic. I hope that this coronavirus continues because we're making all, right? We have to, hey, it's been going great for us, but I realize obviously that this has been very tough for the people, blah, 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 so we can incorporate the rest of the world. So just the last 5 minutes before we say bye-bye, anybody else that hasn't said anything tonight and would want to make sure that, you share your thoughts before we go? Going once, going twice. Okay, Paul, you want to say something? Paul Dominguez.
Yes, I wanted to share that in my classes, I really got a very high engagement. And the reason why is because I introduce a lot of culture. And my approach is non-intimidating. I'm another student, but with experience and no hair.
I love that.
But I introduce culture. I think culture, you should develop a nice work culture within your corporation, and that will help a lot because languages do not stand up in the air by themselves. They require of a culture. If you have a culture, that's engagement. and that brings very high results.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. So we could stay here tonight, for a lot longer, but I want to be respectful of your time. I know we started a little bit late. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I'm going to give the floor to David to, close us up. And then Tamara, you can also have, a few closing words for tonight. And then I'll just say, it's been a pleasure to see, your commitment for everyone, taking the time in this, busy days on a middle of a week here to engage with us, and your participation. I had a great night tonight talking with all of you, and thank you, David. Thank you so much, not only for the time that you've made tonight, for the honesty that you had, the sincerity to speak, to speak your heart, but how, the friendship that you've given me for, I don't know, like about 6 years, where you've really made time to help and support, and you really are an inspiration, and it's been a pleasure to be with you tonight. So please, some words, and then Tamara, some words after David, and then we'll
it's inspiring to see a big group like this who shows up at dinner time on a subject like this because they care, and because they're trying to get better, and they want their organizations to get better. So I'm inspired. And I love Paul's last thought there, is that ultimately we're all students. And if we show up to learn all the time, we'll be on this journey of getting better and making those around us better also. So pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tamara, and thank you, Luis.
Thank you, David. Tamara, you want to close us out?
Sure. It was so wonderful to have the opportunity to connect with everybody. Obviously, these are conversations and topics that are near and dear to people's hearts, and we hope to continue these conversations in future events, and would love to be able to keep in touch with everybody via LinkedIn and email. And we'll be sharing some information in the post-event email, along with the replay for people that weren't able to stay for the entire event, or if you're catching the replay today, you probably got that via email. So thank you again. Thank you for being patient with our technical issues, and we appreciate it all. It looks like David wants to share a happy holiday message to send us.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Have a good evening or good morning, wherever you are.
Nice to see you all. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.